I'm introducing this concept right now, but the rest of this video is part of one that I created for doctoral students. But I think the concepts are the same for those of you who are faculty members. What is basically the rest of this video is this is what academic language is, here are its components, and hopefully by listening to the same information that was given to Bethel doctoral students, you will understand what academic language is so you can impart that information to your students in the classroom. Let me contextualize academic language for you. So when my son was like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, took him to the doctor's office to get a shot. So we go into an exam room and I said to the nurse, now does he need to take off his clothes and put on a gown for the shot? And she said, no, he don't need no gown. And I thought, what do you mean he don't need no gown? That's not correct grammar. I'm not sure I want you to give my son a shot, because if you said he don't need no gown, maybe you don't know how to give him a shot correctly. Well, I did let her give my son a shot, but I was nervous the whole time. But the point is, there's no correlation there between the skill of giving a shot and using correct grammar. But nonetheless, because she used very poor grammar, I doubted her credibility. I didn't think she had the ability to give a correct shot to my 4-year-old or 5-year-old son. So that's one element of academic language, and that is accuracy both in your grammar as well as in your facts. Now, another example has a little bit more to do with disposition, which we'll be talking about more. A friend of ours, Pat, was talking about a young recruit that he had in his office, and Pat's a stockbroker. And he said, I frequently listen into conversations with clients so that I can give them feedback on those conversations. So he had this young, I don't know, 22, 24-year-old recruit, and he's listening to the conversation, and the recruit says, oh, awesome, that is totally awesome. Oh, definitely, 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 awesome, that is so awesome. So he finishes with the conversation, and Pat goes in and he gives him some feedback. And at the end of the feedback, he says to him, do you realize that you use the word awesome about 5 times in a paragraph of conversation, and you use definitely about 3 times in that same paragraph? And the young recruit said, well, I didn't notice that, but what's the big deal? He said, it's a huge deal, because what you have just told that seasoned client is, number 1, you're probably between 22 and 24 years old. Number 2, you're not very experienced, and number 3, you're not professional. And so you just lost considerable credibility with that client that now you have to pull back. So that's the point of this. The objective of this workshop is that by the end of listening to this audio workshop, you will be able to communicate and understand a working definition of academic and professional language. And along those lines, that you will be able to apply Western, and I'll explain that in a minute, Western academic and professional language as opposed to colloquial language in your writing, in your thinking, in your speaking, and in your listening. That's the goal for today. Now let me unpack that just a little bit more. What I mean by Western is every culture has a different system of language, and it has to do with how language is structured, what is considered acceptable in different settings. Today, I'm just going to talk about Western discourse because that's the primary audience that you will be using as Bethel doctoral students and beyond the Bethel setting. So, what is academic language? In general, academic language is the language of school and the professional workplace. A clear definition of academic language is the specialized language, both oral and written, of academic settings that facilitates communication and thinking about disciplinary content. That's probably one of the better definitions by Nagy about what exactly academic language is. Now, when you're trying to think about academic language and visualize academic language, think of it as existing along a continuum. On one end of the continuum is the type of casual conversations you may have with your family in the living room, or you may have with your friends out to dinner. On the other end of the continuum is much more formal academic language that you would have in a classroom setting, in a boardroom, in a presentation that you may be giving, or in a text that you may be writing. It's very, very different, and that's what we're going to talk about, is that continuum of academic language. Now, what are the key features of academic language? Academic language has 6 primary key features which we're going to talk about today. There are other features, but we're going to focus on these 6 today. 1, vocabulary. 2, presentation or setting up of information. 3, genres in a professional or academic setting. 4, discourse markers. 5, organization of information. And 6, and I'm going to squish these together because they're because they are somewhat combined: register, stance, and code switching. Let's go first to talk about vocabulary. Vocabulary consists of 3 basic types of words: Tier 1 words, Tier 2 words, Tier 3 words. Tier 1 words are words that you pick up in, whether it's a native language or learn second or third or fourth language, in everyday speech. Words like was, were, should, could, I, you, there, we, me, those types of words. Tier 3 words are more technical vocabulary and technical words used in a specific discipline. For example, telescope would be a word used in space science. Mosaic is a word used in art. Metaphor is a word used in literature. Denominator is a word used in math. Those are the type of technical words that are Tier 3 words. Probably the most difficult that you need to start adding to your used vocabulary and your knowledge base are the Tier 2 academic words. Those are words that basically have 2 definitions. The first definition was coined by Beck, McCowan, and Osmondson, and they said Tier 2 words are words that are sophisticated language, which we see in very high quality literature. That definition has now broadened to mean all words that are used across, sophisticated language used across all academic disciplines. And if you're thinking, well, what does that look like and what might those words be? Probably the best resource to look at are Coxhead's word list. Basically what she did is Coxhead took a plethora of textbooks in 6 or 7 different disciplines: health, science, business, English, law, and then she said, what are the words that are used across all of these disciplines? And she did a huge lexicon study. Out of that lexicon study, she came up with a large word list that are used across all these disciplines. Rather than giving you the whole word list, which is daunting, I gave you those that appear the most frequently, the level 1 and 2, and her levels go from 1 to 10. And that would be on page 3 of the handout that you have, which accompanies this video. At the bottom part of that are words that I went through the list and said, these aren't 1 and 2 words, but they're also very, very commonly used in academic settings, so I included those words. What might those words look like? Words such as analyze, complex, impact, concept, function, identify, aggregate, input, assemble. Those are the kinds of words that we see appearing across all disciplines, and you need to be familiar with them so that when you are hearing or reading, which is receptive language, as well as speaking or writing, which is expressive language, that you will understand what those words are and what they mean, because they're sort of the glue that hold together the technical words and the technical concepts that you're either trying to comprehend or trying to disseminate to other people. So those are the Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 words. Obviously, you've got the grasp on Tier 1 words because you're here in a doctoral program. But the Tier 2 and the Tier 3 are words that you're going to want to grasp and glean. And you may say, that list is huge. How can I learn all those words? Well, you probably can't if you try to sit down and learn all of them at once. But what the research tells us when you're trying to learn new vocabulary, the best way to do it is to have about 5 and no more than 8 words a week, and that you read the words, you get a working definition of the words, and then you notice the words in your reading, you try to use those words as frequently as you can, and once those words become part of your, what we call working vocabulary, that you see yourself using them, then you might pick up another 5 to 8 words and work on those words until they become part of your working vocabulary. Along those lines, it helps if you can have words that have something in common as opposed to just the first A words on the list or then the next B words on the list. You can do that, but it's much harder to grasp their meaning. So that's a way that you can grasp that. Plus, if you want to, there are other websites which give you words and ways to play with words and word families to increase your vocabulary. So those are some of the ways that you can increase them. And of course, we know the other way to increase your vocabulary is extensive reading. Now, the next type of academic language that we're going to talk about is presenting or setting up information. I'm not going to spend time on that today because that was covered very thoroughly in the Foundations in Writing video. Along those lines, another element that's important in academic language is understanding genre and understanding the structure, the tone, the organizational patterns, and so forth of various genres. Again, I'm not going to spend time on that today because that's in the Foundations of Writing video. However, when I was talking to some of your professors about what are the key elements you want to make sure that I include, they said, Judy, spend a lot of time telling them they need to do informative writing and not persuasive writing, because that's one of the pitfalls that doctoral students or any college students fall into when they're doing academic writing. You have an intelligent audience. They don't want you to talk them into something. What they want their speaker or writer to do is give them this detailed factual information, and then they will make up their own mind because they're an intelligent audience. Now, if you're saying, but in this information, point A is much more important than point B, C, and D. If I'm not persuading my audience, how do I get that across? The way you get that across is by the amount of space that you give point A versus B, C, and D. So let's say you have 15-page text. Point A is 5 pages. Point B is 2 pages. Point C is 2 pages. Point D is 2 pages. Then your audience is going to implicitly understand that of all these concepts, point A is the more important. Okay. So now we've talked about, with academic language, the importance of vocabulary, presentation, genres. The next thing we're going to go to is discourse markers. And you may say, what in the world is a discourse marker? A discourse marker is a phrase that signals what information is being presented. For example, use another example from my son. He's in college, I go to visit him. He and his buddies are talking about using the discourse marker. They don't call it discourse marker, but that's what it is. Using the discourse marker, that being said. And what they said is, you know, you can say almost anything to somebody if you say, that being said. And what they mean is it's a way of disagreeing in a formal setting that is considered courteous and academic. So for example, if someone says global warming is a problem in our universe, you can say to them, I understand your point that global warming is a problem in our universe. That being said, there's another body of research which disagrees that global warming is a problem in our universe. Do you see the difference? Instead of saying you're wrong, that being said is a discourse marker telling the audience I'm shifting to a different viewpoint. I'm shifting the idea. Other examples of discourse markers are if you say, in conclusion, okay, discourse marker. As an audience or a reader, I know now we're shifting. I'm pulling everything together. Another example of a discourse marker is the use of the terms if-then. If circumstances, then consequences. That's a discourse marker that you can use as a writer, but you also need to be aware of when you read that as a reader, that this information is being put out. Understand that discourse markers, yes, they are a way of writing a text and reading a text, but they're also a way of thinking about a text. For example, another discourse marker is the use of terms such as first, second, third, fourth when you're making points, and I will deal with that in a little bit on another point. So when I read an academic text, often I will write in the margins, ooh, this is the first point, so I'll make a 1 and circle it. I'll read a little more. Oh, second point, put a 2 and circle that, so that I am parsing out the text myself so I can better comprehend the text and understand the text. So again, this academic language is not just how we read and how we speak, but it also has to do with how we think about information. Now, I alluded a minute ago about organizing, and that's the next point that we're going to talk about with academic language, is how do you organize information? The list I'm giving you today is an inclusive list, not an exclusive list. The first way, and probably the easiest and most common way of organizing information, is either chronologically or sequentially. For example, if I'm talking about the civil rights movement, a good way for me to organize the phases of the civil rights movement might be by using chronological dates. So I might say 1954 was Brown versus Board of Education, and then moved to 1955 to 57 was Rosa Parks sitting on the front of the bus and the Montgomery bus boycott, going to 1964, in which the Civil Rights Act was passed, 1965, Voting Rights Act was passed, to 1968, the assassination of Martin Luther King. Notice that what I've done is I've given a chronological outline of the key events, again, chronologically. If you were doing something that you were talking about a process, you might do that sequentially, the order that something is done. Now, another way of organizing information in an academic setting would be to organize from general to specific. And that's the pattern that I've chosen today as I'm giving you the information on academic language. So if you think back of the organization of the talk, How is it constructed and put together? You start out very general, academic language, level 1. Level 2, this is a definition of academic language. Level 3 of specificity, here are the key components of academic language. Level 4 of specificity, here is a definition and more specific details on each of the key components of academic language. So the presentation was put together from general to specific, another way of giving out information. A third way of organizing your information is superimposing order on a particular text. And that was what I was explaining a few moments ago. So the way that I superimpose information when I'm reading a text is this is the first idea, second, third. It also helps sometimes when you're listening to text. For example, a few years ago, a senior administrator was saying, I want to give you the 4 key points that came out of the Board of Trustees meeting. Okay, great. This administrator happened to be a bit verbose. So he began talking and he said, first, blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking, oh, have I missed the second point? Have I missed the second point? Then he said, second. It's like, good. Okay, point number 2. I remember the first point, second point, blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking, did I miss the third point? Third. Okay, good. I've got that third point. So by creating and superimposing order, you can both better listen to the text, but it also is a way for you to signal information for your audience, whether they are reading something that you're doing or listening some information that you're giving. Another way of organizing text is by hierarchy, going either from the most important information to the least, or going from the least important information to the most important information. And that's another common way to organize text. I think you probably understand that, so I'm not going to give specific details. The only detail I'll give you on that one is understand you should organize as far as, okay, what's most important, what's least important, what's most important to your audience, what's least important to your audience. That will dictate the order that you put your information. Another way of organizing information in academics is by key ideas, and you take a key idea, following it by supporting points. Back to the global warming example. Your key idea may again be global warming appears to be increasing in our universe, and here are the key points that support that. One key point might be ice caps and glacier melting. Another key point might be the earth temperature. Another key point might be the average air temperature. You have supporting points that are backing up your key point that you're trying to get across. The last way of organization that I'm going to talk about today is what's called a deductive chain or a logical sequence of information. The most common of that is the A and B, if A and B, then C. So where do we see that? If Socrates is a man and men are mortal, then Socrates is mortal. That's the common deductive chain. It's a very effective thing to do in your speaking or in your writing, but because it clearly demonstrates an if-then situation. Now, the last element of academic language I'm going to talk about today is register stance and code switching, and I'm going to kind of mush them together because they're easier to discern that way. Register is communication expectations in a given context or a setting. An academic register is authoritative. It is formal, it's very precise, it's very efficient, it's a little more distant and abstract as opposed to warm and personal, and academic language uses a lot of technical words as well as academic words. So that's part of that whole academic register. Stance is similar to the role a person plays in a given context. Are you a friend? Are you a colleague? Are you a subordinate? Are you an authority figure? What is your stance? What is your positioning in this particular setting? And it changes setting to setting. Code switching is understanding how to navigate various registers and various contexts and various stances. So example, I'm going to get an example for my son again. So my son is in high school. And he comes home and very commonly would tell stories that he heard in the locker room. And very often I would say to him, you know what? That story is okay in the locker room, but I don't want to hear that story in my living room. So what I was telling him is the register you use with your buddies in the locker room is not a register that you may use in the living room. You don't talk that way in the living room with the rest of us. Along those lines, again, what is the stance? The stance, the relationship that you have with your friends, is not the same one that you have with your parents and your siblings. So you can't use those same stories. You can't use those same stances in those settings. And so what I was teaching him is code switching. These are the various language that you use, the expectations in this setting versus this setting. Another example of that happened at my daughter's wedding. So my daughter's wedding, at the beginning of the reception, my husband gave a speech and her father-in-law gave a speech. When the father-in-law got up to speak, he said, okay, to my son Eric, I want to give you a little advice. When I first got married, I was a litigator. So, back to register, what I would do all day is, in the courtroom, I would cross-examine people at the witness stand. He says, but when I came home at night, didn't work too well if I cross-examined my wife. Okay? And he said, by the same token, he said, you are going to be an officer in the Army. So, as an officer in the Army, you will be giving orders all day. When you come home at night, and then of course everyone laughed because they saw what that correlation was. You don't want to be giving orders to your wife. So what I want to show you is the advice he was giving had to do again with register. This is okay, and this is the register you use. This is the stance you use in this setting. It's not appropriate in this setting. He was also using a deductive chain. If this is the register and this is the stance, then it is not appropriate in this setting. So he's also using an example of a deductive chain there. Okay. Now, in closure, notice that use of the discourse marker. In closure, the objectives that we had for today are that by the end of this video session, you can communicate a working definition of academic and professional language, and that you will be able to apply academic and professional language as opposed to colloquial language in your writing, in your thinking, in your reading, in your speaking, and in your listening. Now, as you are able to apply those, this will help with your success both at Bethel and beyond. For example, a friend of mine, Ann Swanson, did a study on student teachers, and this is what she found out. The student teachers who were able to adopt academic language in register, stance, and code switch, in register and stance, when they were in the hallway and they would talk to students, they would be a little bit more casual. Oh, love the shoes. How was the game last night? Then when they came into the classroom, it's a different register and stance. It was more formal, it was more authoritative. Those student teachers who could code switch were very successful. The student teachers who were casual in the hallway, casual in the classroom, were not successful. By the same token, the student teachers who were very formal in the hallway, formal in the classroom, were not successful. So as you take this information, I want you to be thinking about the continuum of casual conversation and academic language. It doesn't mean that you have to change who you are. What it means is be conscious of these so that you will know which setting that you need to be using various elements of academic language with the hopes that you will succeed at Bethel and beyond. Thank you.